In 1363, Philip the Bold, the youngest son of the King of France, John II, was given the Duchy of Burgundy by his father. Despite the defeat the French faced against the English in the Battle of Poitiers 7 years prior, the courage and bravery Philip displayed fighting alongside his father was rewarded by being given the Duchy of Burgundy and becoming Philip II. Philip II only really became the Duke of Burgundy when the new French king, Charles V, confirmed him in 1364. Philip went on to marry Margarita III of Flanders, an heiress of great landed wealth, in 1369. This marriage plays in his favor when his father-in-law, Louis II of Flanders, dies in 1383. Philip and his wife inherit Flanders, Artois, and the Free County of Burgundy, also known as the French Comté, and now controls a wealthy realm stretching from the Swiss mountains to the North Sea coast. In 1380, King Charles V dies, and Charles VI succeeds him but is still a child, unfit to rule as a king. Philip is one of his regents and holds considerable power over the affairs of Charles VI. By 1393, King Charles VI is now mature, but France is quick to find that he suffers from mental illness. After he kills some knights in a fit of rage at a ceremony, Charles VI is apprehended and Philip declares himself as regent. Thanks to his power, he is the de facto king of France until 1402. Charles VI's brother, the unpopular Louis I, the Duke of Orleans, becomes mad at Philip because of this, as well as the fact that Philip tends to divert funds from the royal treasury to fund his rule of the Low Countries and a wealthy, extravagant court life. A nasty feud between the House of Valois, who rules France, and the House of Valois-Burgundy, ruling Burgundy and Philip II's lands in the Low Countries, begins. Eventually, Charles VI regains some sanity and appoints Louis I as his regent in 1402. Philip dies on April 27, 1404, bequeathing to his successor the strong foundations for a powerful and rich Burgundian state. John was born on the 28th of May, 1371, to Philip II and Margarita III. John was the heir to Philip's various domains in eastern France and the modern-day Netherlands and Belgium. Answering the call of crusade, John was the key commander of the French forces sent to help the Hungarians attack the Ottoman threat. Like his father, John displayed much bravery at the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396, but was captured and released a year later. Because of this, John earned the moniker the Fearless. John succeeds Philip II in 1404, inheriting the Duchy of Burgundy. John also inherits his mother's counties in Flanders, Artois, and the French Comté when she dies a year later. John is most notorious for continuing the feud that his father began with Louis, with both parties turning to such methods as kidnapping the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne, to gain more influence in the French court. In November of 1407, the Duke of Berry arranged a meeting between Louis and John to make peace. At the Porte Barbette, the 18 men were waiting for him in the shadow of a house with their weapons concealed from view. The night was dark. As the Duke approached the gate, they leapt upon him in a wild fury, and one shouted, "Kill him!" dealing him a blow with his axe, which severed his hand and clean at the wrist. The Duke, seeing such a cruel attack made upon him, shouted out loud, "I am the Duke de Lorient," to which some of those who were striking at him answered, "That is just what we wanted to know." At this, the rest of the men joined in, and shortly the Duke was knocked off his mule and his head smashed with blows that the brains ran out on the roadway. Even then, they turned him over and over, so hacking at him that he was very soon completely dead. With him was also killed a squire who had been his page. When he saw his master on the ground, he lay upon him to protect him, but to no avail. The assassination of Louis I sparked a civil war between John's supporters called the Burgundians and Louis's allies, the Armagnacs, led by the new Duke of Orleans' uncle, the Count of Armagnac. The Armagnacs oust the Burgundians from Paris in 1413, but they themselves are decimated when a new invasion force by the King of England, Henry V, defeats them at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. John is able to avoid the terrible slaughter by simply not being there with his men. In 1418, the Burgundians retake Paris, and John stylizes himself as the king's protector. The new leader of the Armagnac faction, the Dauphin Charles, looks to reconcile with John. They meet on a bridge at Montreux, near Paris, on September 10, 1419. There, Armagnacs assassinate John. Philip III was born on July 31, 1396, to John the Fearless and Margaret of Bavaria. Upon his father's assassination, he inherited the Duchy of Burgundy and its various domains in the Low Countries at the age of 23. With this, Philip III brought with him a hatred for the Dauphin Charles, who he blamed for having a hand in his father's death. He aligned himself with the English by signing the Treaty of Troyes with King Henry V in 1420, which saw the Queen of France confirm that Henry V was the heir to the Kingdom of France, as well as marrying a daughter of Charles VI to Henry V. However, the dream of uniting the English and French crowns under one ruler was broken when both Henry V and Charles VI died in 1422. Henry V was succeeded by Henry VI, and Charles VI was succeeded by the Dauphin Charles, who is now Charles VII. In 1429, a teenage peasant girl, Joan of Arc, received messages from God telling her to renew the French nation, and was able to secure an audience with King Charles VII. I bring you news from God that our Lord will give you back your kingdom, bringing you to be crowned at Reims, and driving out your enemies. In this, I am God's messenger. Do set me bravely to work, and I will raise the siege of Orleans. Her passion and religious fervor convinced Charles VII to give Joan command of an army, and, surprisingly, she did what she said. Many more victories at towns like Bataille and Troyes boosted the French morale in their war against the English. In 1430, Joan was captured by a company of Burgundian troops and put to trial by English and French clergymen, who accused her of heresy and witchcraft. On May 30th, 1431, she was sentenced to death, and her body was burned at the stake on a pyre. An inquiry into her sentence 20 years later annulled it, stating that she had died a faithful Christian. Thanks to the French victories, the Burgundians stayed on amicable terms with the French going forward. In the meantime, Philip III grew his Burgundian state larger and larger in the Low Countries. Namur was purchased in 1421. Hainaut fell in 1427. The Duchy of Brabant was taken over in 1430, and Holland and Zeeland were taken in 1434. The Duchy of Luxembourg was taken over in 1443. Not only did Burgundy reach a territorial maximum under Philip III, but also a court life maximum in terms of its extravagance. Philip III often hosted lavish parties, feasts, and celebrations, some of the best and most decadent in late medieval Europe. One of these feasts include the Feast of the Pheasant, a grand public feast held in the city of Lille in 1454 that acted as a call to crusade against the Ottomans, which, at the time, recently conquered the Byzantine Romans and the city of Constantinople. A few other cultural achievements include the Order of the Golden Fleece, an exclusive club of high-ranking knights and noblemen starting in 1430. He was a patron of the arts. Musicians, poets, jewelers, and sculptors were brought into the Burgundian court and created works that mimicked their Renaissance descendants. The Burgundian School, a group of composers in the 1400s, made secular music. Talented painters were employed, like Jan van Eyck, who was sent down to Portugal to paint a picture of Princess Isabella so that Philip could see her likeness before committing himself to marrying her. One of the more important moments in Philip III's reign was the Congress of Arras, organized in 1435 between Charles VII and Philip III. There they decided to make peace, with Philip III ending his alliance with the English and recognizing Charles VII as King of France. In exchange, Charles VII promised to punish John the Fearless's murderers, and he also lifted the Burgundian dukes from the obligation of having to pay homage to the King of France. This was a key event in the growth of the Burgundian state. By not having to swear homage or fealty to the King of France, the Dukes of Burgundy were now technically no longer a vassal to the King of France. However, the Duchy of Burgundy wasn't independent either. The Congress of Arras didn't mention giving independence to the Duchy of Burgundy. At the same time, the duchy was an appanage, a special type of feudal holding given to a brother of the king and only inheritable through direct agnatic inheritance, meaning that if the duke didn't have a son, the duchy was to be returned to the King of France. The Dukes of Burgundy also technically had to swear fealty to the Holy Roman Emperor. The Duchy of Burgundy, part of the Kingdom of France, was only one title of the duke, although there remained one. Philip III was also the Duke of Luxembourg, and seeing how the Duchy of Luxembourg was part of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip III was a vassal of the Emperor. This also went for all of his titles within the Holy Roman Empire. In the bigger picture, none of this really mattered, because Philip III had grown and consolidated the Burgundian state to such an extent that it was now more powerful than both the King of France and the Holy Roman Emperor. The Grand Duke of the West, as he proclaimed himself, died of illness at the age of 70 on June 15, 1467. Charles the Bold was born in 1433 on November 10th to Philip III and Isabella of Portugal. From a young age, Charles displayed remarkable energy, a fiery temper, and a relentless pursuit of glory in battle, earning him the epithet, the bold, but also the rash. While less inclined towards fostering art in his court compared to his father, as he would be consumed by wars that he'd start in the coming years, Charles had a keen fondness for music, contributing to the development of the Flemish School of Music. In 1465, 2 years before his father's death, Charles was given control over the extensive territories of his father, spanning the Duchy of Burgundy, Luxembourg, Flanders, Artois, and various other regions within the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of France. Charles initially harbored no animosity towards France. However, upon assuming power, he nurtured ambitions of geographically uniting his domains by conquering Alsace and Lorraine, as well as elevating his duchy to a kingdom to rival the new King of France, Louis XI. His rivalry with Louis XI only intensified as time went on, leading him to become a key figure in the League of the Public Weal. The League of the Public Weal was an alliance of discontent French nobles against Louis XI, who were angry at him for pushing centralization reforms and wanted to preserve their old feudal privileges. Charles and the League of the Public Weal were able to secure some concessions with the Treaty of Conflans in late 1465. Louis XI and Charles met to conduct the Treaty of Péronne in 1470, which aimed to clarify some of the terms listed in the Treaty of Conflans. When news broke during the negotiations that anti-Burgundian rebels were in the city of Liège, backed by Louis XI, Charles forced Louis XI to relinquish any French influence in Flanders and to observe Charles brutally put down the revolt, which included the destruction of much of the city. Charles also implemented administrative reforms, centralized governance, a reorganized and powerful army, and instituted financial controls. Heavy taxation and the establishment of institutions like the States General in the Netherlands reinforced his efforts to consolidate power. His judicial reforms included the establishment of new courts to administer justice across his domains. In his pursuit of territorial expansion and the creation of a kingdom to call his own, Charles bought lands such as Ferret and Lower Alsace. He also forced the purchase of reversion for the Duchy of Guelders, meaning that when Duke Adolf of Guelders died, Charles would succeed him. The growth in Burgundian power was a worrying sight for the people living along the Rhine River, who were in Charles's direct path of expansion. Cities like Bern, Basel, Zurich, Strasbourg, Fribourg, and Cologne enjoyed independence from dukes and counts, with even the emperor exercising minimal influence over the land. Being taken over by Charles could mean disruption to their trade networks and, obviously, their independence. Looking to destroy Burgundian power once and for all, the cities and cantons of the Swiss Confederacy allied themselves with the Habsburgs of Austria and the Valois of France, as well as the Duchy of Lorraine in the League of Constance. The Swiss moved for war. In 1474, war broke out between Charles and his ally, the Duchy of Savoy, against the Swiss Confederacy and the Duchy of Lorraine. However, conspicuously, the French and the Habsburgs were absent. Nonetheless, Charles recognized that Lorraine was cut off from its allies and could not rely on assistance. The Burgundians swiftly overpowered Lorraine, and most of Lorraine's towns were swiftly captured. By October 1475, the capital and sole remaining unconquered city, Nancy, fell to the Burgundians. Charles proclaimed himself Duke of Lorraine before promptly shifting southward. When Charles moved into Lorraine, the Swiss indirectly supported their Lorrainer ally by launching an invasion of the Vaud region of Savoy, which bordered Switzerland and served as the pathway to Bern, the foremost Swiss city. This incursion directly challenged Charles, as his allies' territory came under attack. With the conquest of Lorraine nearing completion, Charles hastily rallied his forces and marched southward, first to Savoy and then to the Vaud, seeking to engage the Swiss army, which was equally determined to confront him. A decisive battle loomed. Upon entering the Vaud, Charles dispatched his troops to seize various castles while personally directing efforts toward the town of Grandson. His formidable artillery relentlessly bombarded the Grandson castle until its garrison capitulated. With much of the Vaud under Burgundian control, the Bernese and their allies swiftly mustered an army in response to the siege. Charles met to meet the Swiss, but due to poor scouting, ran into them instead. The ensuing clash that early March 1476 caught the Burgundians off guard, with their forces unprepared and only a fraction present. Charles attempted to outmaneuver and encircle them, but the Burgundians mistook the amassing Swiss army for a retreat and plunged into a retreat themselves. Charles was forced to withdraw. While the Burgundians suffered relatively few casualties at the Battle of Grandson, the Swiss seized a significant portion of the supplies, including Charles's prized golden hat adorned with precious gems. While Burgundian forces were engaged against the Swiss, the exiled Duke René of Lorraine adeptly rallied the Lorrainers, bolstering his ranks with local volunteers. They reclaimed fortified positions, including Nancy. Meanwhile, with much of his army decimated after the Battle of Morat in June, Charles scrambled to muster fresh troops. Despite his efforts, he failed to recapture Lorraine. Duke René received a boost to his army when seasoned veterans volunteered to join. Charles faced the opposite while camping at Nancy. Supplies were running low, and Charles faced betrayal from within his ranks as key mercenaries defected to Duke René. On January 5, 1477, despite anticipating an assault, the Burgundians found themselves overwhelmed by the Lorrainers and their Swiss allies, as treacherous weather and strategic flanking maneuvers sealed their defeat. The shattered remnants of the Burgundian army, hungry, poor, cold, fled toward the safety of Metz, leaving behind a trail of death and despair. On the cold Tuesday morning of January 7th, 2 days after the battle, a Lorrainer party rode out to the battlefield of Nancy to find Charles's whereabouts. They saw a cluster of corpses. Though their bodies were naked and their clothes torn, the messengers recognized the faces belonging to the Burgundian court. Separated from the pile was a lone body by a pond. One cheek had been bitten off by wolves. A deep cut of a halberd was embedded in the head, spear thrusts in the thigh and belly. Charles the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, and no male heir to succeed him, was killed. Charles's daughter and only child, Mary, had succeeded him when he died. Mary was born to Charles and his second wife, Isabella of Bourbon, on February 13, 1457. As Mary was the only legal heir to such rich and expansive lands, her hand in marriage was the most desired in Europe, and she had a long line of suitors waiting to take it since she was born. These names include Ferdinand of Aragon, Nicholas of Lorraine, Duke Francis II of Brittany, the Dauphin Charles, Charles of Berry, Philibert of Savoy, and Maximilian, the heir to the Archduchy of Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. In late 1475, Charles came to a final agreement on Mary's marital future. He had negotiated with Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III for the marriage of Mary to his son Maximilian. He brought his daughter with him to Treves, where he intended to persuade Frederick to bestow upon him a kingly title, in return for Mary's promised betrothal. Frederick refused to comply and left early one morning without a word to Charles. When news of her father's death reached King Louis XI in France, Louis wasted no time in seizing the Duchy of Burgundy itself, as well as the regions of Franche-Comté, Picardy, and Artois, exploiting the chaos and defections among the Burgundian nobility that came with Charles's death. Louis justified the invasion by pointing out Salic law, which did not recognize a woman's right to inherit land, and thus he considered the land to be leaderless. Mary was also cornered by the States General in the Low Countries, who increasingly asserted their authority and independence during Charles's reign, going so far as to refuse to provide crucial financial and military support during his war with the Swiss. To placate them, Mary and her consort, Margaret of York, convened the Great Privilege in February. This landmark document granted extensive rights and powers to the States General, including the right to self-assembly, the establishment of a new administrative council, and limitations on the ruler's authority, like not being able to declare war, make peace, or raise taxes without the consent of the States General. To secure her position in the face of the French threat, Mary ultimately chose Maximilian, who was powerful enough to counter the French. They married swiftly by proxy in April 1477, and the wedding proceeded smoothly in August. Mary and Maximilian's marriage appeared promising, marked by a genuine, loving relationship. As Maximilian was co-ruler of the Burgundian estate, he was entrusted with protecting it. He secured victory against the French in 1489 at Guinegate, the formative battle of the German Landsknecht troops. Their union bore fruit with the birth of Philip in 1478 and Margaret in 1480. Mary's popularity soared as she embraced her role as a patron of the arts and remained accessible to her subjects. However, tensions grew as Maximilian's governance style alienated some Burgundian cities. Despite being an accomplished horse rider, she was thrown from her horse while out on a ride. She died a few days later, thanks to complications because of it, on March 28, 1482. The Burgundian domain fell to her son Philip, but because he was still a minor, Maximilian forced his way into becoming regent. Maximilian's policies faced staunch opposition, notably from the Estates of Flanders, led by the city of Ghent. Even after reluctant agreement from other territories, Ghent initially refused Maximilian's rule, only relenting under the condition of a peace treaty with France. However, Maximilian's refusal to accept dismissal from Flemish burghers strained relations. Eventually, the Estates General accepted him due to peace negotiations with France, resulting in the Treaty of Arras in December 1482, which favored France significantly. In turn for the hand of Margaret to the Dauphin Charles, France would officially receive the Duchy of Burgundy and the regions of Franche-Comté, Picardy, and Artois. Ghent, joined by Bruges, revolted in 1487, reflecting widespread discontent with Maximilian's rule. Maximilian had been heavily taxing the cities to fund his ceaseless wars in the Low Countries. Maximilian was even imprisoned by the people of Bruges for a time in 1488. The States General attempted to remove him from the Regency of Flanders, leading to a dual authority in the region between Maximilian and his son Philip, and the Regency Council for Flanders. Years of internal strife ravaged the economy, leading to prolonged suffering and the decline of Bruges' economic superiority, which was replaced by Antwerp. The conflict persisted until Ghent's final submission in 1492. Louis XI's death in 1483 turned France over to the Dauphin Charles, now Charles VIII. Maximilian had married the heiress to the Duchy of Brittany, and, by proxy, after Mary died. Charles VIII saw this as a threat to France. However, since there was no in-person wedding, Charles saw it fit to return Margaret to her father and, in 1491, married Anne by military means. In compensation, and to prevent Maximilian's possible interference with Charles's plan to invade Italy and enforce his claim to the Kingdom of Naples, Charles gave Maximilian both Artois and the Franche-Comté in 1493's Treaty of Senlis. Maximilian answered the call to return to Austria and succeed his father as Holy Roman Emperor in 1493. The States General meeting that month declared his son, the 15-year-old Philip, ruler of the Burgundian domains in the Low Countries, now known as the Habsburg Netherlands. Philip's ascension pleased both the nobles and patricians of the Netherlands as, unlike his father, he was a native Netherlander and of Burgundian blood, which offered stability despite ongoing tensions. Central authority grew in the Habsburg Netherlands, with the Great Council established in Mechlin in 1504. The influence of the medieval guilds, which formed the backbone of the revolts that Maximilian faced, waned as the central government strengthened control. Conflict arose between Habsburg and non-Habsburg Netherlands, notably in the Duchy of Guelders. Charles had bought the reversion to the Duchy of Guelders in 1471, and when Duke Adolf died in 1473, the duchy went to Charles and his successors Mary and Maximilian. However, Charles II, the grandson of Adolf, reasserted his claims to the duchy and conquered it in 1492 with the support of the French. On November 5, 1495, a historic double marriage was made that would reshape European politics for centuries to come. Philip married Joan and Margaret to John. Joan and John were the children of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. John died shortly after marrying Margaret, followed immediately after by his infant son and Joan's elder sister Isabella, who was married to the King of Portugal. This made Joan heiress to the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile. Despite Joan's mental illness, she was able to have one significant figure born, Charles. The Spanish thrones were now a Habsburg domain. Philip's policies post-1500 were dominated by the Spanish succession, culminating in a journey to his prospective kingdoms and returning after Isabella of Castile's death in 1505. The Netherlands were no longer at the forefront. However, his sudden demise on September 15, 1506 delayed the waning importance of the Low Countries until his son, Charles, came of age in 1515. Charles was born on February 24, 1500, in the city of Ghent to Philip and Joan, and almost immediately he was poised to inherit a vast empire. With the death of his father, Charles became the titular Duke of Burgundy and the Lord of the Habsburg Netherlands at an early age. With the death of his maternal grandfather, Ferdinand II in 1516, Charles inherited the Spanish crowns. His mother Joan had been confined in Tordesillas since 1509 due to her mental illness, so this made Charles the de facto sole ruler of Spain. With the death of his paternal grandfather, Maximilian in 1519, Charles became Charles V, the new Holy Roman Emperor. As the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles held sway over a vast European empire, including Germany, Austria, northern Italy, Spain, and, starting in the 1520s, a grand colonial empire in the Americas and the Philippines, thanks to people like Hernan Cortez, Francisco Pizarro, and Ferdinand Magellan. The Netherlands was now just a single jewel out of many in the empire on which the sun never sets. Charles's aunt Margaret, who was his regent in the Netherlands during his minority, showcased her diplomatic skills by negotiating the Ladies' Peace at Cambrai with Louise of Savoy, the mother of King Francis I of France, resulting in a definitive exchange of territories between France and Burgundy. The French now recognized the Habsburgs' rule over Artois and Flanders, which means that, by law, Charles was no longer a vassal of France, and France could exercise their authority over those two regions. For his part, Charles relinquished all claims to the Duchy of Burgundy, which was now, some 50 years after its actual annexation by France, recognized as indisputably and definitively part of France. The other Burgundy, Franche Comté, belonged to the Holy Roman Empire, and remained in the hands of the Habsburg dynasty. Perhaps more importantly in the territorial evolution of the Habsburg Netherlands is the issuing of the Burgundian Treaty in 1548 and the Pragmatic Sanction of 1549. The Treaty of Venlo in 1543 saw the Habsburgs finally acquire the Duchy of Guelders once and for all, and the Pragmatic Sanction of 1549 solidified the Netherlands as a single entity under Habsburg sovereignty, ensuring perpetual sovereignty under Habsburgian heirs. Habsburg efforts to centralize administration, such as establishing new judicial courts, faced challenges from local nobles but contributed to increased orderliness. Stressed and aged by nearly 40 years of ruling a global empire, Charles V announced his tearful resignation speech to the States General of the Netherlands on October 25, 1555. The Habsburg Empire was split between his two relatives. His son Philip II would receive Spain and its colonies, the Italian domains, and the Netherlands. Ferdinand, Charles V's brother, received the Holy Roman Empire and its associated titles.